This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Thank you for tuning in, NC Spin. Well, there's never a dull moment in the Old North State. This week, we've got lots to talk about. Two of North Carolina's largest universities announced this week they were suspending in-class instruction. We wonder if others will soon follow suit. We get our panel's views on the Democratic National Convention and preview next week's Republican Convention in Charlotte. And as always, we ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Speaking of our panel, this week they include Dennis Wicker, former Lieutenant Governor of North Carolina, John Hood, syndicated columnist and author, Chris Fitzsimon, director of the state's Newsroom, and Donna Martinez with WPTF Radio and the John Locke Foundation. We'll begin our uninterrupted discussion after these brief messages from our underwriters. In more than 21 years on NC Spin, I never endorsed a product or sponsor, but I volunteered to do this message for family physicians. Over the past 40 years, my family doctor could quickly diagnose my illnesses because he knew my medical history. Evidence suggests I'll live longer, have a higher quality of life, and save 33% on health care costs. I believe in my trusted relationship with my family physician.
Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Your life is more flexible and efficient than ever, and your energy is too. See how North Carolina's electric cooperatives are building a brighter future for the rural communities we serve at ncelectriccooperatives.com/brighter.
Let's begin the spin. Late last week, we started hearing about COVID-19 clusters of cases at UNC Chapel Hill. Late Monday, UNC Chancellor Kevin Guskowitz announced that beginning Wednesday, there would be no more in-class instruction for undergraduates. NC State followed suit on Thursday. I want to ask each of you your reaction to what happened. Did the chancellors make the right call, or should they have waited a bit longer? Donna Martinez.
They did not make the right call. They really jumped the gun here. They should have anticipated that this was going to happen, particularly with kids coming in from other places. A more prudent, better course would have been to tell everyone, faculty, students, staff, this is what we expect for the first 2 or 3 weeks. We are likely to see some outbreaks. We expect you to follow the rules. We're going to get through the first couple of weeks. We're going to contact trace, and then our own precautions will kick in. We're going to get through this together. Hang in there. Here's what to expect.
Interesting. John Hood, your reaction.
I agree with Donna. This is a difficult situation all the way along, all through the summer and into the opening of these campuses. I think they should have been better prepared with more space. One of the concerns Chapel Hill's leaders had is that they very quickly filled up their space for quarantining students who tested positive. Right. I think they should have assumed they needed more space than that. It was a false economy. If they were concerned about the cost of having additional facilities available, even hotel rooms and so forth, if they thought that was prohibitively expensive, it's a lot more expensive for students to go home and potentially take their tuition and their other revenue with them. So I think they did act too quickly. I understand the pressures they're in. I wish they'd been better prepared for quarantine space.
Dennis Wicker, did the chancellors make the right call?
Tom, as Mike Tyson said one time, a plan's great until you get punched in the mouth. And I think that's what happened here. These chancellors both had plans. They were based on science and data, as I understand it. They thought they had really worked thoroughly through the issue of whether or not the students would return to campus. But I agree with Donna and John, and I just think they should have waited. They misjudged really the velocity of this virus, and they also misjudged, I think, student behavior. I don't think that was in their calculus. I think they have waited and come back and see and evaluated later on would have been a better plan.
Chris, did the chancellors make the right decision?
Well, two things. One is a lot of public universities like Georgetown and others around the country decided to wait and bring students back later to see what the caseload was going to be, number one. Number two, the chancellors didn't have any choice about whether to open. The Board of Governors and President Peter Hans told them they had to open the campuses. We have one of the best schools of public health in the United States in Chapel Hill. I think they did the best they could given the circumstances, but it sort of was a fool's errand from the beginning And it's interesting that the chancellors are bearing the brunt of the blame when they were sort of ordered to do this and had no choice.
Donna, that's a great point to start the discussion. Both of the chancellors said the universities had done a lot of work during the course of the summer to make sure campuses were safe, but students weren't acting responsibly, and it forced them to change their approach to instruction. Was it unreasonable for the schools to have even thought that 20-year-olds were going to act responsibly and maintain social distances, Donna?
I think it was reasonable to expect that. Look, I know it's young people, and we like to say, hey, they're just kids, they're college students, but realize these are young people, but they are adults, and it's not as if this is a new situation that was sprung on them. They're old enough to elect the next governor of North Carolina. They can enter into a contract, and they can go fight a war. It's reasonable to expect that they would behave appropriately and prudently, and I've been mystified by kind of the two extremes we've seen from students. Number one, just going out into huge crowds, taking no precautions, being very irresponsible. And on the other hand, you have some students who are telling reporters, well, you know, I should have never had to come back, like they want to go back to mommy and daddy and live in the basement and be woken up when it's all over. This is a challenge, the first of many they will face in their lives. They're adults. They should be behaving that way.
Some of the students' interviews and responses were interesting. One student particularly said this was never a question of if they were going to have to go to online learning. It was a question of when they were going to do it. I was fairly interested in an article that Barbara Reimer, who is the dean of the school, Chris talked about this a little bit. Barbara Reimer, the dean of the school, the Gilling School of Health at UNC, said the reason that they decided to have the in-class instruction to start off with was, A, the students wanted it, B, the parents demanded it, C, the UNC Board of Governors commanded it, and then D, they knew the financial consequences in the event that they did not do that to the university. What's your reaction to that response, John?
Well, I think it was very helpful to understand the thought process and the complicated nature of it. I understand the point about UNC Board of Governors ordered all these campuses. Every campus in North Carolina, including the private colleges, I think almost all of them, if not all of them, have also decided to proceed. They weren't ordered by some cabal in a central office somewhere. Duke has done so, High Point, Wake Forest, et cetera. Most of them are still proceeding. They expect to have cases. They are going to isolate those cases and quarantine the students for the couple of 3 weeks or whatever it takes. I think it was an entirely rational decision to proceed. Most of North Carolina, including most higher education, North Carolina has still proceeded. I don't assume that all the campuses will shut down over the next month. I certainly hope not. But again, I also want to restate, just as you talked about the Dean of Public Health and are explaining all the different considerations, I understand the difficulties that everybody's involved in. This is an unprecedented and difficult time, but we've got to make decisions that are in the long-term best interest of the individuals involved and the institutions involved.
Chris, we saw something unusual that happened. The faculty at Appalachian State University took a vote and expressed no confidence in their chancellor, Sherry Everett's, decision to go back on campus. Did that surprise you a little bit?
It surprised me. Yeah, I think it surprised me, but it illustrates what John has just said. This is a very complicated situation. People are worried about their safety. They're worried about transmission of the virus. I think there's another context in here. You know, we have a significant number of Americans, unfortunately, have turned wearing masks into a political issue. We have a lot of mixed messages happening in America. So I think that we have to take this in the larger context. I think if we were unified as a country about what to do, maybe some of these things would be a little easier, but it is very complicated. I don't begrudge them for trying to open. I think they're doing the best they can. I do think more schools will close. I don't know if all of them will close, but they're closing around the country. We have Iowa State had 150 test positive cases just the other day. This is going to continue to come out. People still go to parties. Interestingly, the problem isn't the classrooms. The problem is what kids do when they're not in the classroom.
And off campus.
Right.
A lot
Absolutely. That's what I mean.
of this is going off campus.
One issue as well, though, Tom, is that the goalposts keep moving from officials, and not just from the president, from state officials as well. When we started, this was about the need to make sure that the hospital system wasn't overwhelmed. Things keep moving, and now we're at a point where some people apparently think that we should shut down our lives and the economy until there is a vaccine. So the problem
Who's saying that, Donna? The governor's not saying that.
You talk to people who are fearful about going back to school, or parents that Tom referred to about fearful about having their child at a college. It's because there's no vaccine. Well, if we're going to do that, then we're going to shut down our lives until well into 2021. We're living in a time where more and more people have little to no tolerance for risk. That's unhealthy.
Dennis, let me switch gears just a little bit. I found it interesting that even with the closures, the universities seem to want to go forward with fall football. Now, Appalachian State has had to put theirs on hold because they were members of the football team that got the virus. East Carolina has temporarily suspended theirs. Carolina took a pause, and here at the end of the week, they still hadn't decided anything about football. Will there be fall football? Should there be fall football?
Well, I hope there is fall football like everyone else because we enjoy seeing the sport so much. But I doubt that it'll be a completed season. They may start out like they did, bringing the students in. But I think already these teams, as you've noted, Tom, are experiencing outbreaks on teams. I think Carolina themselves had one on the team, and they suspended practices, I think, for that reason. I think we'll get into the season and see it's just not possible. How do you engage in that kind of sport without being so close together that something doesn't happen?
Well, it's kind of a mixed message, too. You're telling your students they got to go home. They can't stay in the dorms. We're not going to have in-class instruction, but, we're still going to have fall football. John, I don't know whether you noticed the comments from Paul Frigga, I think I'm pronouncing his name correctly, who is a strategist with the UNC School of Business, and he sounded a real warning bell because of this. He said, sending the students home and the resultant loss of revenues, dorm fees, whatever, is going to have serious financial repercussions, which in the case of UNC Chapel Hill is going to require severe budget cuts, as much as 25 to 40%, which could amount to hundreds of millions of dollars. The UNC Board of Governors has already told these state-supported universities to prepare plans for 25%. Is that what state-supported universities are going to have to face now?
It depends on the campus, and I was concerned about this not only because of the issue of students on campus and the revenue associated with that, but also university leaders seem to be counting on federal money, that was going to solve all their budget problems. The federal money has not yet appeared. There's logjam in Washington. So I think the campuses are going to have to make tough decisions, and Chapel Hill in particular, as the professor suggests, is in big trouble. I should mention, by the way, there is a distinction between what UNC Chapel Hill did and what NC State did. Yeah. NC State went to online classes, but they didn't insist that all the students go home. I actually think that was a wiser choice because it gives them the opportunity later to perhaps change their path again. Once the students go home, they're probably not coming back for the semester. And I'm just concerned that we're not thinking again about the long-term institutional implications. And by the way, in Chapel Hill and some of these other campuses that may close, public and private, you should expect some layoffs as well.
Oh, no question about that. And Chris, John wants to talk about the longer term. Let's look at the longer term here. How is the UNC system going to absorb all of these huge deficits? Do you think we're going to start seeing, because it's going to affect private colleges also, do you think we're going to start seeing colleges close?
Well, I think some small private colleges have been struggling before this. So the ones that were already struggling, and we're already starting to see that. I hope to goodness we don't see any public universities close. I don't think we will. This is the job of the General Assembly and the governor and the Board of Governors to figure out the best way to do it. I'm sure there will be budget cuts. I'm sure there will be money that the General Assembly has, whether it's rainy day funds or other money that's reappropriated. I don't think I hope we don't see massive cuts. We're going to have to see some cuts. We're going to have to see some tightening of the belt and all those things. But I think until the fallout comes, until the lawmakers start putting the budget together, we're not going to know exactly the depth of these decisions.
Which they told us this past week might be well into September or October, because they still don't have a handle on what the revenue picture is going to look like. The July 15th revenues were unclear on that. We talked about public schools. No sooner had the virtual school bell rang to begin the start of the new year than the virtual website started crashing under the overwhelming demand of students wanting to connect online. Now, the problems were resolved that same day, but it was unsettling to many, and then Wednesday, it turned around and happened again. Dennis Wicker, Senate President Pro Tem, toured the Mount Airy High School opening day. They were having in-class instruction, as he and other Republican legislators had not demanded, but made their wishes known. He made no secret over his irritation that about 60% of our students were starting online, and he said it was a recipe for failures for students, particularly from less fortunate households who can't afford learning centers or private tutor. What's your reaction to Berger's statement?
I think Senator Berger makes a point here. But Tom, let's be clear. This crash occurred because of the vendor failure to have it working properly when it went online for the students. That vendor was engaged by the Superintendent of Public Instruction, Mark Johnson. So I hope that the irritation that Senator Berger's feeling is aimed toward that more than the fact that the school districts are online. I would say that this presents a great opportunity for Senator Berger to lead on an issue that's going to be with us for a long time. There's lots of things that could be done to improve online instruction to the students. We need to build in accountability. We need to know how teachers handle this online infrastructure. We need to get access infrastructure to the infrastructure, to internet and so forth. And I think this is why Senator Berger could perhaps embrace what Governor Cooper's trying to do on funding $12 million for improving that infrastructure. So there's a lot of chance to lead here on this issue, and it's very important for our future and our future of our kids and their education.
Donna, I think it's a sign of our times. Whenever something happens, you want to find somebody to blame. And the elected Republicans this past week were pointing the finger at Governor Cooper, said we should have had more in-class instruction instead of counting on virtual learning. They blamed Cooper for this. Is this his responsibility? Should he be blamed?
Well, I think it's everybody's responsibility here, what's happening. I think Senator Berger is only partially right when he talks about what the consequences are of being online. Certainly for vulnerable kids and their parents, it could be a lost year. That's my big fear.
Yes.
The kids having a lost year, and the potential of that is just devastating. But on the other hand, what's happening also with at least some parents is that because they are now required to actually be very involved in their child's education, they are starting to see firsthand what their child is like as a student, what their challenges are, what their aptitudes are, what learning environment is best for them. That is always helpful, and it's terrible that it's come because of this situation, but if you can have a tighter connection between a parent or a guardian and that child and their education, in the long run, that is good for the child.
Chris, in my weekly interview I do on UNC-TV every Wednesday night, Secretary Mandy Cohen made a very interesting point, and I think proclamation to a certain extent, when I asked her, should the kids be back in class in K-12? Is it safe? And what she said to me was, yes, I think it's safe. The conditions inside public schools, K-12 public schools, is very different than it is in universities. They don't live in dorms together and so forth like that. She did say that with social distancing and with face coverings and really deep cleaning, regular deep cleaning, she thought they could go back to class. Now, she added there was a risk. And to, I guess, Donna's point or somebody's point earlier in the discussion, everything in life is risk. Is this worth the risk to send our kids back into the class?
Well, I think we have to follow the science. We have to track the cases. We have to trust the experts. Dr. Cohen is one of those experts. I think probably the most qualified Secretary of Health and Human Services we've ever had. So I would follow her advice. I do think the CDC's advice has always been, the American Academy of Pediatrics has said we need to get kids back in the classroom unless there's a high case count, unless there are a lot of people in the hospital, unless there's a reason in certain communities. That's why Governor Cooper's plan let schools decide among themselves. Gave them a choice of plans. Even Republican school districts, Harnett County, for example, is starting this semester online, hardly a bastion of crazy left-wing liberals there. So I think we're letting local school systems do it, which I think is true. I do think everybody, all of us want kids back in the classroom. One quick point in response to Donna, I don't disagree that it's good that parents are becoming involved, but what do parents do who are supposed to be working? If they do have a job to go back to, if they're supposed to work online, it's very difficult. We don't have really a child care infrastructure. This brings up a whole lot of problems. And one final point, I have a friend who has a relative who teaches in a low-income school. In the spring, only half of their kids were able to sign on for online learning because there's no broadband access in their community. We've had legislators, Senator Berger has been the head of the state Senate since 2011. Why do we have massive parts of North Carolina after 10 budgets that don't have broadband access?
Well, Senator Harry Brown has been working on that prodigiously, there's no question, but it's a great segue into my next question. John, Governor Cooper announced this week that they were allocating $12 million for high-speed internet broadband access and for some hot spots in rural North Carolina, and that it would connect up about 8,000 families. Is this going to be a big help, a major help in keeping our kids from having to sit outside McDonald's or Starbucks to do their homework?
It will help. It is insufficient. And the brutal fact of the matter is if state regulation and local school board decisions thrust families, whether they like it or not, into online education, and students in North Carolina have a constitutional right to an educational opportunity,
yes.
then the state and local governments are going to have to expend dollars for broadband access. I actually don't think there's really a dispute about that at this point if we're talking about not access to the internet for all sorts of business or commercial reasons, which is helpful but not a constitutional right. This is a constitutional right, and if they're not going to deliver in-person education to families that want it, then I'm pretty sure they have to make sure those families can access the internet effectively.
Great point, but to that point, Dennis, if that is the case, and it is the legislature's responsibility to appropriate money to make sure this happens, why hasn't it happened? We've had action from the General Assembly, no question about that. Like I said, Harry Brown has been spearheading it. Why do we still have so many places where we don't have high-speed internet broadband access?
Well, because they don't have the financial ability to do so, Tom, and I think that's where the legislature...
Or the desire to make it happen?
Well, both. And I think that this is where someone like Senator Berger, who has a lot of influence in the legislature, could step forward, assemble a task force or somehow to get a plan that would bring forward access to the internet all over the state so these children would have the ability to have online instruction. This is really a tragedy that I think Donna was speaking to about, here we are in this pandemic, and it seems to me that we're all blaming each other for the problems. We need to be looking for solutions. That's going to fix this problem. That's what's going to educate our kids, and I think that's what we need to be focused on.
And Donna raised a good point earlier when I asked about who should take the blame, and she said this is a multi-headed monster that we're trying to attack here, and we're all involved. Let's get to the point of the show where we asked the panel to tell us something we don't know. John Hood, I'm going to start with you.
Well, speaking of COVID-19 and blame, North Carolina actually has one of the worst data problems in the country when it has to do with reporting excess deaths, which is something the CDC has been tracking and all across the country. North Carolina has one of the slowest reports, but it's not a conspiracy. There's no one hiding anything. It's because North Carolina, unlike many other states, did not already put that process into electronic data collection from death certificates. We are now doing so, so that should improve in the next few months.
All right, Dennis Wicker, tell us something we don't know.
Well, Tom, it's not been widely known yet, but I think it will be as time goes on. And that's the staff that Peter Hans is putting together in his as president of the university system. His chief of staff is a name that's fairly well known and familiar to a lot of us, Norma Houston. Norma, as you may recall, was the chief of staff to Mark Bass when he was in the Senate those years. She is sharp as a tack. She knows how to get things done. She works hard, well respected. I think he hit a home run in choosing her as his chief.
I got about a minute left. Chris, give us something we don't know.
If there's been a worse week for Republicans in recent memory, I can't remember it. The president's former campaign manager was arrested. A Senate report put out by Republicans said the other campaign manager was talking every day to a Russian spy. The state Republican Party chairman was sentenced. The House Rules Chair pleaded guilty to a felony. This has been a rough week for North Carolina Republicans.
Donna, give us something we don't know.
This week at the John Locke Foundation, we commemorated the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which gave women the right to vote. I was so delighted to be able to moderate a forum with really successful, achieving women. It's very uplifting.
Yeah.
If you want to see it, go to johnlocke.org.
All right. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, sign up for our free weekly email newsletter. Give your feedback and read my weekly column. Visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. While there, subscribe to our newsletter, our podcast on NC Spin, and on YouTube. Join us next week with more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin. In more than 21 years on NC Spin, I never endorsed a product or sponsor, but I volunteered to do this message for family physicians. Over the past 40 years, my family doctor could quickly diagnose my illnesses because he knew my medical history. Evidence suggests I'll live longer, have a higher quality of life, and save 33% on health care costs. I believe in my trusted relationship with my family physician.
Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Your life is more flexible and efficient than ever, and your energy is too. See how North Carolina's electric cooperatives are building a brighter future for the rural communities we serve at ncelectriccooperatives.com/brighter.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.